Hello everyone. Welcome to topic study. The topic that I'm going to teach you today is soil mechanics. Okay, so in this very first lecture, I'll be starting with basics of soil mechanics, and in upcoming lectures, I'll be providing the full course on soil mechanics. Fine. So, what we are going to study in this chapter is first chapter is origin of soil and soil water relationships. So in this lecture I'm going to discuss how the soil is formed and what are the different relationship between soil and water. Fine. So moving on, first, what is the definition of soil? What basically soil is? Okay, a soil, it is an unconsolidated material which is composed of solid particles formed from disintegration of rocks and the void spaces in between filled with water, air, or both. Also, soil may contain organic matter. Okay, so you have to focus on these words only. That is, it is an unconsolidated material. How it is formed? It is formed from solid particles. And how we get these solid particles? We get these particles by disintegration of rocks. Okay, and when these rocks break, they have void spaces between them, and the void spaces in between them are filled with air or water or both. Fine. And it may also contain organic matter. Okay, you can see here by an example. Suppose this is a rock, and due to some disintegration, this rock breaks, and what we get soil. So how this is soil is formed? Now what happens, there are soil grains. These are solid particles, as you can see here. Okay, and in between them there is a void space. Fine. So this is a void space, and in these void spaces are either filled by water or air or both. Fine. So in this way we define soil. Fine. Now moving on, what is meant by soil mechanics? Okay, firstly, the soil mechanics, the word soil mechanic, fine, it was coined by Dr. Karl Tarjagi in 1925. Also, Dr. Karl Tarjagi is known as father of soil mechanics. Okay, what basically we study in soil mechanics is, in soil mechanics we study application of laws of mechanics and hydraulics to engineering problems. Okay, whatever we study in mechanics and hydraulics, we apply it to soil. So in this soil mechanics we deal with the forces and the action of those forces that we studied in mechanics. Okay, so it is basically an application. Now it is a branch of mechanics, deals with the action of forces and flow of water in soil. Fine. What happens is, there are different kinds of forces that acts in soil. So in this soil mechanics we study about those forces and what are the effects of those forces, and also there is void spaces and there's a water in between them. So we also study about the flow of water in soils and what it creates, what effects it creates. Fine. Now moving on, how soil is formed. Basically how soil is formed, let's start with the origin of soil. Okay, so the origin of soil, it starts with three phases. First is erosion, second is transportation and deposition, and third is earth movement. Fine. So first what happens, there's a erosion of soil, then that eroded soil may get transported and get deposited. Okay, and third is earth movement. Okay, let me tell you, suppose this is a rock. Okay, it is a rock. Now what happens, due to wind, air, water, any other agency, this soil gets degraded. Okay, so what happens, small solid particles are formed, and when these solid particles get transported and get deposited, it becomes soil. So this is soil. Fine, I hope you got my point. Now moving on, let me tell you what basically erosion is. Erosion is degradation of exposed rock by weathering process. Okay, there's a rock and it get degraded by weathering process, and weathering process, it is of two types. First is physical weathering and second one is chemical weathering. Fine. Now I'll be telling you the difference between the physical weathering as well as the chemical weathering. Now first start with physical weathering. What happens in physical weathering? Physical weathering, it is an erosion of rocks by wind, water, or glacier. Okay, when the rock breaks due to the action of wind, water, or glacier, it is known as physical weathering. Okay, there's also another way by which this rock get eroded. Disintegration caused by alternate freezing and thawing in cracks in the rocks. Okay, so sometimes there are cracks in the rocks and their alternate freezing and thawing takes place. Due to this also the rock gets disintegrated. So this comes under the category of physical weathering. Okay, and one thing, the main point about physical weathering is that the soil retain the same composition as that of parent rock. Fine, whatever the composition of the rock is, suppose it is a metamorphic rock, so the soil that will be formed from this kind of rock will be showing metamorphic properties. Fine, and we can say example like gravel and sand come under physical weathering. These kinds of soil come under the category of physical weathering. Now moving on, what happens in chemical weathering? Okay, chemical process results in changes in the mineral form of parent rock. Now what happens is that when the rock is exposed to anything, okay, and like wind, water, or glacier, or any chemical agent, what it does to the rock, it erodes that rock and it changes the mineral composition of that rock. So that kind of rock comes under the category of chemical weathering. Okay, further, the second point about is due to the action of water, especially if it contains acid or alkalis. Suppose the rock is exposed to water, okay, and the water contains acids or alkalis in it. So what will happen? There is a chemical reaction between the rock particles and the water which contains acid and alkalis. Due to this, there will be chemical changes in the soil formed. Okay, so this comes under the category of chemical weathering. Okay, so basically what we get from chemical weathering is clay mineral. Okay, and what kind of structure a clay mineral have? It is a plate like structure it has, right? So now moving on, what is residual soil? Okay, product of rock weathering still located at the place where they are originated. There's a rock suppose this is a rock and disintegration takes place here. Okay, and the soil gets deposited at the place where it gets degraded. So this kind of soil is known as residual soil. Okay, by definition, once again I am repeating, products of rock weathering still located at the place where they are originated. जहाँ पर वो फॉर्म हुए अगर वहीं पर सॉइल मिल गई हमें, तो that kind of soil is known as residual soil. Okay, so this kind of soil have weak bond and it has varying void ratio. Means the void ratio, it has different void ratios, sometimes the bigger void ratios, and it can have a small void ratios also. But this kind of soil which is in residual soil have better engineering properties. Fine, so now moving on, the second type of soil is the transportation oblique deposition phase. Fine, so now the second type in soil formation is a transportation or deposition. Okay, so how soil gets transported? The transported by agents such as wind, water, glacier are called transported soil. Okay, what happens is sometimes the soil is formed and it gets transferred from the origin location or the parent location to the new location. So that type of soil is known as transported soil. And what are the transporting agents? Like wind, water, glacier, etc. Okay, so how these characteristics of soils, due to this the characteristic of soil is affected. Fine, so the characteristics of soil such as size of particles, shape and roundness, surface texture, degree of shortening are influenced by transporting agencies. Okay, what happens when this soil get transported? It faces many changes while transporting. Okay, so it affects the various properties of soil, so that we are going to study in upcoming lectures. Here I am giving you a introduction that due to this transportation of soil, properties of soil get deviated or there are changes, the properties get changes. Fine, now what happens in the properties of transported soil? There is a small grain size and large amount of pores. Okay, so when we get transported soil, it has large amount of pores and we get small grain size. Fine, now moving on, according to transporting agency, soils are classified as. Now what happens? They have different transporting agencies like wind, water, air, etc. Fine. So due to this, the properties, the soils are classified. So I'm telling you some of them. Now first one is alluvial deposit. It is deposited by river water. when when the soil gets transferred by river water and gets deposited, that kind of deposit is known as alluvial deposit. Okay. Now second one is lacustrine deposit. Lacustrine deposit deposited by still water like lakes. Whatever the soil is deposited by still water of lakes, that is known as lacustrine deposit. If the soil is deposited by seawater, if the soil is deposited by seawater, that kind of deposit is known as marine deposit. Okay. Now the fourth one is aeolian deposit. If the deposits is done by wind, that kind of deposit is known as aeolian deposit. This can be seen in Registan. Okay, so there the wind blows and it takes away the soil with it. Okay, and it gets deposited. So this kind of deposit by wind is known as aeolian deposit. And glacial deposit by ice. Okay, sometimes glaciers break and they carry soil with them, so that kind of deposit was known as glacial deposit. Okay. Now further, in my next lecture I will be discussing soil water relationship and other properties of soil. Thank you, and please do like and subscribe my YouTube channel for more videos. Thank you.